Hey, this is Todd living in Daytona Beach, and today is a brand new series that's called Take 15 with Todd. Today we're going to discuss flood zones in 15 minutes or less. We're going to discuss what a flood zone is, how to determine what a flood zone is, the typical insurance costs associated with flood insurance, how to determine your flood zone, how to determine your elevation of your home. We're going to look specifically at two areas in Daytona Beach and discover and discuss their flood zone. And we're even going to discuss a way to have your flood zone reevaluated. This is Take 15 with Todd. Hey, if this is the first time to the channel, go ahead, hit subscribe and the bell so you never miss a thing about living in Daytona Beach or a short little 15-minute break, such as discovering your flood zone. And as always, if you're moving to Daytona Beach or the surrounding area in 12 days, 12 months, 3 days, 3 months, give us a call, text, email, set up a Zoom video call, because we will make your move memorable. If you like, you can feel free to leave us a comment as well. First, let's talk about what a flood zone is and how it's created. The flood zone map is actually created by FEMA, which stands for Federal Emergency Management Agency. And they set up these flood zones and flood zone maps across the U.S. And that's how they evaluate flood zone areas and flood potential for where houses are built. Now, a FEMA flood zone map looks something like this. Now, let's discuss what each flood zone actually means. Certain lettering or numbering of a flood zone, and that determines exactly the severity of the flood zone. So let's discover that right now. Show you a chart. Basically, the flood zones are broken up into 5 separate categories. Zone D, which is undetermined risk. You have Zone C and X, which is unshaded on a map, which is low risk. There's no special flood hazards in the area. Then you move on to flood zones B and X, which is shaded on a map but has moderate risk. Then you move into the high risk and coastal high risk zones. So here you have Zone A, Zone AE, A130, AH, AO, A99. That's a special flood zone hazard area. And of course, coastal high risk. That is zones V and VE and V130, which is a very high special flood hazard area. So now you kind of know the designations that FEMA has set up for flood zones and what the flood zone map looks like. For those that don't know, flood insurance is completely separate from home insurance. Now, when you purchase a home, not only are you paying on the mortgage, you're paying also on the insurance and the taxes every year. So your insurance goes to your home insurance. But your flood insurance is completely separate, and that's a separate bill that you pay every single month or every single year. So to be aware of that, your flood insurance will go up or down depending on the zone that you're located in. Well, you might be asking yourself the question, well, Todd, how do I determine where my house is located and if it's in a flood zone or not? So FEMA has devised a really cool little tool on their website. Right here, you can actually plug in. You plug in your actual address and it'll bring up the actual flood map zone. So as you can tell, depending on where you live at, it might be in a shaded or unshaded zone, and typically will tell you what the zone designation is. Is it an X? Is it an AE? And that will determine how much flood insurance, even if you need flood insurance. So one thing that a lot of people ask before they move to an area, especially Florida, is flood zones. Now, Florida is one of the flattest states in the US, and yes, it does flood. We have hurricanes almost every single year, or at least a tropical storm, and that can make owning a home here a little bit stressful, especially if you're in a flood zone. So today we're going to look at Daytona Beach, and more specifically, we're going to take a look at 2 districts in Daytona Beach that are actually on the beach side. Here they are. So you can see here we're going to look at the Surfside Historic District and the Seabreeze Historic District. 2 zones in Daytona Beach on the beach side. We're going to discover and discuss what their flood zones are. 3 homes that are specifically located in the Seabreeze Historic District and the Surfside Historic District. So let's take a closer look at those right now. The first home on the list, beautiful home right here, $269,000. Right there, it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 986 square feet, beautiful home. Now this home actually ranks in the major flood factor of 6 out of 10. So 6 out of 10, what does that exactly mean? Well, 10 being the worst, highest flood zone factor you can have, or severe, 1 being very little. So this ranks in the major flood zone area. Now, with that, however, it only falls in the flood zone of X. Let's move on to the next home right here. Beautiful home, $399,000, almost $400,000 right here. It is 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,782 square feet. Major flood factor for this home is actually 5 out of 10, and it's just a few blocks away from the first home we looked at. Now, it actually also falls in the flood zone of X. Last home on the list is right here. It's a beautiful home, $575,000, 8 bedrooms, 3.5 bath, over 3,100 square feet, and actually falls in a moderate flood zone. It actually falls to a moderate flood zone factor of 4 out of 10, so even lower than the first 2 homes we looked at. But also the flood zone code for this home is X. Now, you might be asking your question, well, how is it even possible that you can have homes like within a mile of one another, but yet they're in the same zone, zone X in this instance, but they have different levels of their flood hazard. One is at a 6 or 7, one's at a 5, and one's at a 4. Now, what we have to look at now is elevation. Elevation plays a key factor in what flood zone you're in, and even how much you'll pay, and if you have to pay flood insurance. Well, how in the world do I find an elevation on my home, aside from getting some sort of survey crew out there and look at? Well, randymajors.org has a great little tool, little device on their website. You can actually plug in any particular address that you want and bring up all the elevation information that you need. Now, it's going to be critical, and you'll see in a second, as to why elevation is important. It feeds in to how much you will pay, if anything, for insurance. Let's take a look specifically at what factors influence insurance cost and if you need insurance or not. So flood zone X is basically very moderate flood zone. You have a shaded and unshaded zone on the actual map. Is it required? Legally, you're not required to have flood insurance, although it may be a good idea. So what kind of things influence whether or not you have insurance and how much you actually will pay? Well, here's a list of things that FEMA will look at to see if flood insurance is required. For one, the likelihood of different types of flood perils, such as flash flooding, floods caused by waves or high water levels, coastal erosion, and more. Characteristics of a building, foundation type, first floor elevation, and etc. Elevation and distance from flooding sources, coasts, rivers, lakes, replacement costs, value of the building, that is, cost to rebuild after a disaster, ways a building is adapted to withstand floods, such as flood vents, and of course, levee performance. Well, we don't actually have any levees here in Daytona Beach, but we have everything else that can factor in, such as if your house sits at 13 feet above sea level, but yet the first floor is an additional 4 feet above sea level, or 4 feet from where the house sits, then your flood insurance will actually be less because the first floor is actually higher than 13 feet. Also, you have flooding that happens, what they have the 100 and 500 year floodplain or flood zone area or history of floods. If your home is in an area that has never flooded before, your home insurance will be a lot less. The other factors that come into play is, where's the home located? Is it right next to a lake or a river or the ocean? If so, flood insurance can be a high premium. But if you are nowhere near a body of water and there's no risk of flash flooding, or there's never been flash flooding risk in your area, insurance premiums will be low to zero. You may not even need flood insurance. Other factors involved is actually the replacement cost of your home. Now, take into consideration that if your home was built, let's say 1950, to replace a home, let's say of 1,200 square feet, this can be a little bit more expensive nowadays than it was back in 1950 because of material costs. So that's a factor as far as evaluation of your home, to restructure or rebuild the home, how much it would cost to rebuild the house. That's going to feed into and factor in to your insurance premium. Other factors such as, how is your home built and designed to withstand flooding? Do you have vents underneath the home foundation that allow water to pass through, in and out, and not cause any undue harm? Do you have barriers that are built around the house to withstand flooding? Okay, so what are the standard flood insurance costs in Florida? Typically, owners of a single family home will pay anywhere between $770 per year up to $1,300 per year for insurance premiums. That's for full coverage of your home in the event of a flood. Now, take into consideration, again, if you're in Zone X or anything outside or below Zone AE, you're probably not required to carry flood insurance, but it's always a good idea because after all, your home is in Florida. And remember, depending on some factors we discussed, elevation, flood zone area, closeness to a waterway or a body of water, your premium may be a lot lower than $770. It's always good to check with your insurance company, flood insurance company, to get multiple quotes. It's always good to check with multiple agencies. The National Flood Insurance Program is a great place to start, but also you can look outside of that program to see if you can get a reduced rate for flood insurance premiums. Now, are flood zones set in stone? Well, believe it or not, you can actually argue the fact whether or not your home is actually in a flood zone that might have been established 50, 60, maybe even 70 years ago. FEMA has a great application that you can submit if you want to challenge your flood zone and have it reevaluated. To think your home might be listed in an AE flood zone, you have it evaluated, and you reduce your risk of flood because they determine that your house maybe is in a flood zone X. And there's a good chance maybe you're not even required to have flood insurance. Hey, this is Todd with Living in Daytona Beach. I want to thank you again for joining us, taking 15 minutes out with Todd and discovering everything about flood zones. And as always, don't forget to hit subscribe and the bell so you never miss a thing about living in Daytona Beach or getting some information like this 15-minute with Todd. And as always, if you're moving in 12 days to 12 months, 3 days to 3 months, give us a call, text, email, set up a Zoom video call, or leave a comment because we will make your move memorable. Until next time, I'll see you at the beach.